All right, welcome to RSP Film Theory. Adam Harstad, Matt Waldman. We're going to talk today more about player value. We're talking about, Adam's latest in Dynasty and Theory on paper champions. And then we're going to take a look at, I just was thinking about this earlier this morning, about players we'd want to see play in different eras. Whether it's a modern player in a earlier era or an earlier era player in the modern era. And we'll just kind of riff off of that for a while. So, Adam, hope you're doing well. What do you got for us when it comes to like relying on imperfect player values, M&Ms, and paper champions?
Yeah, so I've been writing the last few weeks about value and this idea that like if we had access to this platonic ideal value, if we knew like what a player was actually worth, like perfect player values, how would those values differ from what we see in the real world? And today I was expanding, or this week I was expanding on that. And you hear a lot of people talking in Dynasty about managers who are like trying to win the off season, where they're trying to assemble the prettiest roster on paper. They're trading away some of their productive players for young shiny new things, and the question is like, well, okay, how are they ever going to win? Like, you can't win if you can't score points. Paper value is great, but what matters is the points you put on the field. And I wanted to dig into that. I think it's very common to make fun of this idea to chase paper gains, but the reality is that like if we had platonic ideal player values, the team with the highest paper value would win the most championships. This is what we mean when we say perfect player values. Like if player value is perfectly measuring how much a player will help you win championships, then the most paper value equals the most championships. End of story. Obviously, the values that we have are not these perfect platonic ideals. They're flawed things. But as long as they correlate with that ideal, they're going to have the same tendencies, just to a much weaker degree. Dan Hendry's trade values, they're fantastic. I love them. I use them all the time. Sometimes he's wrong about stuff. Sometimes he rates a player quite highly. He was very, very high on Chase Brown coming into this season, and we've kind of cooled on him a bit. And if you had Chase Brown on your team and you were hoping that he would anchor a championship run, you're not feeling super thrilled about that right now. Although who knows what the future holds? Maybe he is the number one fantasy running back down the stretch. You can't tell until it's happened. But that was an example of paper value that didn't translate into championships. But what you'll notice is that when paper value is not actual real world paper value is not translating into championships, that paper value goes down. Trent Richardson at one point was the number one highest valued player in dynasty leagues. The key being at one point. He did not remain the number one highest value player in dynasty leagues. And so maybe for a brief fleeting moment in time, your Trent Richardson roster had the highest paper value in the league, but it didn't for long. But if you can consistently maintain a high paper value, if you can consistently have the most valuable roster in your league over spans of months, years, you are going to walk out. You're probably going to walk out with a ton of wins. You're probably going to walk out with a ton of championships, because insofar as this flawed real world value is measuring anything, it's going to correlate with those things. Now, to some extent, this observation is not really helpful, because it essentially just boils down to just avoid busts, right? Like the way to keep your paper value high was to not roster Trent Richardson, because his paper value went to nothing.
Just don't go outside anywhere,
Right.
And live in a bubble.
Absolutely. Just only draft good players, and good things are going to happen to you in fantasy football. That's, I think, the key takeaway here. But, knowing that you can't really execute on it. You can't really say, oh, well, my strategy is I'm just not going to avoid any players who are bad. I'm just not going to draft any players who are bad. I'm just going to avoid them. I'm only going to get good players. Right? That's not an actionable strategy. You can't create like a 3-point plan where like step 1 is something, step 2 is question marks, question mark, question mark, step 3 is all of your players are good.
But I like the idea of like, okay, let's see how to become a good scout. Play quarterback like Tom Brady.
Sure.
be, study under CJ Bricado, and then find the secret formula for only drafting good players.
Absolutely.
That's easy. There we go.
There's always one step in that process. It's like a very detailed 50-point plan, and one step boils down to magic. Right? I'm going to take these 49 steps, and then one of the steps is going to be and just don't ever make any mistakes ever.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not necessarily actionable to just say, well, just have the best roster in the league every month for the next 10 years. And even with these imperfect values, they correlate well enough with this platonic ideal that's going to translate to a lot of wins and championships. So easy peasy. But still, even if it's not actionable, I think the key takeaway is maybe we should not be so quick to demean the strategy of trying to get the best looking team on paper. Because in theory, if you show me a league and you say, which of these teams is probably going to win the most championships over the next 4 years, it's probably the one with the most value on paper. Now, this is a very weak probability because fantasy's very noisy, and these values that we have correlate at best weakly with what we really care about. But who else are you going to pick? Are you going to pick the fourth most valuable team? No, that doesn't make sense either. I think there's a lot of value in managing your team with an eye towards just maximizing long-term value. I'm just going to make sure that I consistently have the most valuable roster in the league, and whatever happens, happens.
No, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's just, like you said, I mean, in your article, you talked about, Rico Dowdle as an example of someone that you would have looked at Jonathan Brooks 2 years ago for the Panthers and said, I have I have a very strong running back roster. If he's part of a headline of a number of players who look good on paper, he would have been one of them. Probably was the top back in my book in that class. And then, you look at Rico Dowdle, who needed 4 years before he even got his
4 years and an injury to Chuba Hubbard.
Yes, exactly. And 4 years, well, he had 1,300 total yards with a crappy Dallas offensive line. But even then, he didn't play for 2 years. It took September of his fourth year to get his 100th touch in the league. So it was, very unlikely type of scenario. And so
what you're saying is, 2 years ago, we all would have expected that a Carolina running back was leading our teams to championships. It sounds like we were exactly right.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was.
We were right about 100% everything, except for the name. But other than that, we were dead on the money.
That's right. That's right. That's. I mean, doesn't it work in politics or in PR? That I think it works in both those arenas. That this somehow happens. I don't know if it works, but people keep voting for people who do this. So I mean, it must work on some level. Is that the form of the Jedi mind trick that? It's like the stupid bastardized version of it, that this is what happens. I don't know.
Predictions are very, very easy as long as you get to decide how you're going to grade them after they've already run their course.
Yeah, see, there you go. That works, Works in the draft analyst game, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, sure, I had him as my 8th rated running back, but look in my blurb, I said this one positive thing about his game, and that was totally true. So if you think about it, it was a fantastic call.
Exactly. So it worked for me with David Johnson. That's what I did.
Yep.
But no, seriously, on that end of it, I would joke. You bring up. If you're going to bring up a detail and you say, yeah, I didn't think that he would have, I thought if he had this fit in this team or this thing, that can have some value. But yeah, if you're just pulling up see how I said that I thought he could be good, but I spent, the whole time talking about how bad he was. Yeah, that's a little bit of a different story right there. But sure. So when you talk about, how does, you talked about M&Ms like that. You had a big pile of M&Ms. Some of these are poisoned, and but we all love M&Ms. We want to eat a handful, so you want to invent a poison detector. Talk about that analogy with that.
Yeah, so it's getting into the idea of correlations, that our real world value it's flawed. It's not correct. but it's usually directionally correct. Like in theory, the guys we think are most valuable do they have a reasonable tendency to actually be the most valuable. There are some Trent Richardsons in there, but also there's a lot of Christian McCaffreys, Jonathan Taylors, Justin Jeffersons, Jamar Chases. And so correlation is like, what's the relationship between like what we think and what the truth is? And so I use the bowl of M&Ms analogy where like there's a bowl of I've got a big pile of M&Ms. We want to eat some because of course M&Ms are delicious. We all want some M&Ms, but we'd rather not be poisoned. So I create a machine that's going to like test the M&Ms, and if it's poisoned, I'm going to put it in one bowl, and if it's not poisoned, I'm going to put it in another. And if my machine is perfectly calibrated, if the correlation between what my machine says and the actual reality is 100%, I'm going to create two bowls. There's going to be one bowl full of nothing but poisoned M&Ms and one bowl full of totally fine M&Ms. Eat those M&Ms to your heart's content. No worries whatsoever. But, if my machine is 0% accurate, which some people think 0% accurate means it's wrong 100% of the time. But that's not the case. Like if something's wrong, that's the old George Costanza do the opposite thing. Like if you're wrong 100% of the time, statistically, that's exactly the same as being right 100% of the time, because then you could just do the opposite and you're right 100% of the time. Uncorrelated means that you're no more likely to be wrong or right than you would by chance. So let's say I invent a M&M testing machine that I flip a coin, and if it's heads, I say this M&M is poison, and if it's tails, I say this M&M is completely safe to eat. And I'm going to create two bowls, one with the ones that my machine say is poisoned, and one with the ones that my machine says is safe to eat. You're not going to trust either of those bowls. You're just as likely to get sick eating from one as you are eating from the other. They both have poisoned M&Ms at the exact same rate. And so that would be a correlation of 0. If we're looking at like Dan Hendry's trade values, Fantasy Calc's trade values, Keep Trade Cuts, player values, if we're saying these are like an M&M testing machine where we're trying to test value to see which players are poison, they are not this perfectly calibrated machine where every player they say is valuable is going to wind up being valuable, and every player they say is not valuable is going to wind up being useless. But at the same time, they're not really the coin flipping machine either. If you create a bowl of players that like Dan Hendry says are very valuable, and you create a bowl of players that Dan Hendry says are not very valuable, you'd rather be picking from the bowl of players who are very valuable. Now, the calibration on these player value machines, not quite as high as I would like, as any of us would like. We'd all prefer perfect calibration. But at the same time, as long as the tendency is there, we can still get to a point where we can say, like, yes, this bowl is absolutely better than this bowl. And in the long run, you're much more likely to get sick absent-mindedly snacking from this one than you are absent-mindedly snacking from this one.
That's great. The only thing is, I just imagine you with a bowl of where the poison, like, does something embarrassingly funny and doesn't hurt the person, and you're offering two bowls. And I'm just imagining Jason Wood trying to figure out which bowl he should take. Because you're the one serving it.
The scene from The Princess Bride.
Yes.
You've been to the Orient, and a man from the Orient would know that you could never trust somebody, like he's like working through.
Yeah.
So clearly I can't drink from the glass in front of me. But you know that I know that, so clearly I can't drink from the glass in front of you.
That's kind of
the
like
joke's on Wood. Both of the bowls are poisoned.
Right. Like it's kind of it almost kind of reminds me of the rock paper scissors game with Cecil and our buddy. Oh, I can't remember our buddy's name right now. Where Cecil kept beating him over and over again, and he felt like he was overthinking it, and Cecil was just doing something simple, and it was pretty funny because our friend was over intellectualizing it.
Danny Tucito?
It was Danny Tucito,
yeah.
Yes. Danny was
he's like read books on rock, paper, scissors game theory, and, analyzing probabilistic tendencies. And I mean, the funny thing is that, like, you can dive into that, and all it's going to get you is like a 52% win rate rather than a 50% win rate. That's a great example of a poisoned M&M detecting machine that's, it's not chance alone, but the correlation there is going to be pretty low. It's a lot of effort for
Yeah.
very little payoff.
Yeah, Cecil kept poisoning him on that one, and it was pretty funny to watch. But, but yeah. So let's move this on to just some ideas about. Yeah, we'll just kind of riff off the idea of players we want to see playing different eras. Like to me, the most obvious one for me is I would love to have seen Dan Marino play in this era of football, where quarterbacks are protected far more, where it's a wide open offenses, where he doesn't have to deal with, defenders playing. Defenders get away with less at the line of scrimmage against receivers, and I would just love to see whether Dan Marino could throw for a 6,000-yard season or like a 6,060 touchdown season. I think I don't know if it could happen, but it feels like to me it feels like a number that would be attainable for his greatness in this era. So what about you? Is there anybody that
I was about to say if I were picking a quarterback I'd pick Sonny Jurgensen, just because like Marino was not in the hyper modern era, but like it was after the Mel Blount rule, and it was much more open, whereas Jurgensen was, he threw as pretty a ball as anyone ever. He was basically Dan Marino before Dan Marino, just such an incredibly precise and quick passer. But he was playing in like the dead ball era where his receivers were getting mugged. And I think if you put Jurgensen in like today's precision passing timing offenses, he would be considered up there with many of the all-time greats, which he is, but not, casual fans don't really put the respect on his name that he deserves. But I think he would be a sensation. People would, like in the Twitter era, people would go wild for Jurgensen. They would love him as much as they love Mahomes.
Yeah, I had elders who waxed poetic about Sonny Jurgensen all the time, so that makes sense. I would, another player I'd like to see in the modern era, just with training and hopefully that he would have been able to stay healthy, and maybe that he would have gotten some time off to fix his arm, was Burt Jones. Just watching Burt Jones, some of the throws that he made, his ability, when it really started to come together, he looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the league for that 1 year. And then the arm issues really just began to take its toll. But this was a big dude who could run, who had a great arm, who had really good placement on throws, and might have been, I remember seeing something recently where Joe Namath was basically saying, the guy that I want to watch play football right now in the league is Burt Jones. So
his 76 season was, I think, probably one of the top 5 quarterback seasons of all time.
Yeah.
Among like historians and analysts, I don't think that's a controversial opinion. But it was easily up there with 84 Marino, 2004 Manning, 2007 Brady, etc.
Yeah. Lawrence Taylor. I'd love to see Lawrence Taylor in an older era. I'd like to see him in any era. I'd like to see I'd like to see him in this era and see how he would deal with the patty cake on the quarterback type of rules that they have going on now compared to what it was, and whether he would be just frustrated and quit. Or whether he would, whether he would be as good. I've seen some people who I respect when it comes to their understanding of X's and O's about football, and they look at guys like Jerry Rice and Lawrence Taylor and go, they were players of their era. They wouldn't be that good in this era. I just look at this, they talk about different techniques, but I don't think they're right.
Well, but if they were in this era, they would use different techniques. That's
exactly.
It assumes that, like, just because they adapted themselves to one environment, that they would be incapable of adapting to others. That's silly.
Yeah, that's what I think.
I would like to, going back to the late 80s, early 90s, one of Lawrence Taylor's foils, I would love to see Randall Cunningham in this era, just because I firmly believe we missed out on true greatness because he was held back by the crazy in the grasp rule that was around at the time, where basically like if a defender like got his hand on your jersey and like closed his hand, they were blowing the play dead. And we see quarterbacks today all the time like breaking out of like these half-hearted sack attempts and going on, but like Cunningham, time after time after time, you're watching old film and you're like, they're blowing that dead. What the hell? Like he's in the process of shedding the tackler and they're already calling it down and calling it a sack. And that's a large part of his crazy sack numbers, which are true abnormal outliers. But I would love, it's not that I want to see him in this environment. I just want to see him in an NFL that like let him do his thing.
Yeah.
And later on in his career, the NFL was kind of like that, but he wasn't prime ultimate weapon Randall Cunningham anymore. Yeah, I would have loved to see that.
I think Steve McNair fits in that for me for that reason. I've talked about him enough, so I'm not going to go on and on about that. But I think that he would have been fun as a runner in this group, and definitely as a thrower. And I don't think he would have taken as much punishment. In terms of receivers, I'd kind of or in reverse. I'd like to see Tom Brady in the dead ball era, just to see whether he could have done. I mean, I think he was a great quarterback. I just wonder though how that would have played out with the different rule set, and how that would have worked out for him.
I similarly like to see Peyton Manning, but back in like the 30s and 40s, because I want to see him playing safety. I want to see him in the two-way era where like you've got to play both ways. And so on offense, you've got Peyton Manning, and I have no doubt he would have been Peyton Manning still on offense. But then, he's got to go back and line up between the snaps, and
he'd be a kicker. He'd probably end up have to be a kicker.
They didn't have specialist kickers.
A liquored up
position
kicker.
Players.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
He played all three phases. He could be the kicker, but he'd also have to play defense because you only had 11 guys on your team. There was no substitutions. You had to play.
Well, there we go. So that would be tough.
And then also that would be, like Peyton couldn't blame his defense anymore because he was his defense.
That's true.
Nobody blame but yourself. Yeah, Sammy Baugh once led the league in interceptions, not interceptions thrown, interceptions caught.
Yep.
And that was just the era back then, as quarterbacks were also defensive backs, usually safeties. That would have been, I think that would be just a blast to watch Peyton Manning kind of muddling back there, kind of like a wounded water buffalo.
Yeah, him and Tom, I think that would not have been a good safety tandem for sure. Either of those guys. But I'm trying to think who like when I think of receivers, I think of somebody like I'd like to see John Jefferson in this era. Or Wes Chandler. I think of guys like that who were good route runners who could go up and win the ball. And how strong that they were in that area, or
Kellen Winslow, that whole San Diego offense
for sure.
I think was ahead of its time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd like to see Fred Biletnikoff in the modern era, or Steve Largent in the modern era. I'd like to see how they would adapt, especially Fred and all that goo. Of stickum that he wore all over his jerseys and all over his arms.
He wouldn't need the stickum anymore because now they've got the gloves.
That's true.
It's basically it's wearable stickum.
Would he Velcro? Would he try to have that on sleeves too? He probably would. I could see him trying to hire a company to manufacture sleeves that have that going on as well, since he poured that shit all over his body. But yeah, I mean, he was a fun route runner. It would have been interesting to see how a player like him would have translated, in this era. I'd like to see how many sacks Deacon Jones actually would have gotten, if we
the sacks.
Yeah,
it would have been. I think he would have looked a lot like Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
I think he would have held up.
Yeah, I agree, and I'd love to see Myles in that era too, or because I think that he
the late 60s, early 70s, when you were like allowed to kill quarterbacks, he would have like he would have ended careers.
Yeah, for sure. He would have definitely. And I think, and the fact that they, could kind of weaponize their moves with the head slap and things like that, would have been interesting to see what other techniques he might have come up with. I mean, the one against Mason Rudolph kind of failed, but that's with that modern era. But there we go. Yeah, and running backs, of course, are a fun one just because you look at a guy like Earl Campbell and you go, okay, would have he lasted longer in this era? Would he have been as powerful in this era? I mean, I think he would have been a menace, an absolute menace in this era. Walter Payton would have been fun in this era, just because I wonder if if teams would have even gone for him as being like a 5'9", 205-pound running back. Would they have even let him be a full-time back? I think 3/4 of the teams would have screwed it up. And even if he was good, they would have been like, we just don't know if we can carry the load, whereas no matter what size you were as a running back. Now, you could also argue that a 5'9", 205-pound Peyton back in the late 70s would have been a 5'9", 219-pound running back, in this era. But the guy was in such great shape, it's just hard for me to believe that his body type would have been that different.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of running backs, like the great receiving backs in the eras where the receiving wasn't as prized, like Herschel Walker. I think in the modern era, he was far greater than people really remember because he's really only known for that trade. But if you look at like Herschel Walker's career versus Roger Craig's career, they're basically identical. And you have to remember why he was considered worth that trade in the first place. But because so much of his production was as a receiver and even as a returner, it wasn't necessarily used and viewed the same way. But I think he would be, like you get a prime Herschel Walker on the San Francisco 49ers instead of Christian McCaffrey, and they would know exactly what to do with him. He would have been a lot of fun. Or in a similar vein, I would have loved to see like Lenny Moore today, which Lenny Moore at the time was like the closest to like a true hybrid between a wide receiver or a running back. Is he a running back? Well, one year he led the league with 17 rushing touchdowns, and this was in a 12 or 14 game season. Is he a wide receiver? Well, he averaged like 18 yards per reception for his career and had like twice as many receiving yards as rushing yards in his prime. So he was kind of like the original, like he could have been either. He kind of was both. That'd be really fun to see in the modern era with these new offensive paradigms, these new old offensive paradigms. But at the same time, I also would have loved to see like Percy Harvin back in the Lenny Moore era, because he was the closest I think we've seen to Lenny Moore was Percy Harvin. And you throw him back in that era and he would have done some really fun, crazy things. Or the 50s back with like Frank Gifford. There were a lot more players like that who are these tweeners who could kind of do everything and the league knew what to do with them. So yeah, I would have loved to see Percy Harvin back then.
I love that. I would have, on the defensive side of the ball, I think of like Aaron Donald and Geno Atkins facing off against guys like John Hanna and Mike Webster, or Stevenson, the center for the
Stevenson was, for my money, the best center of all time.
Yes.
But he was like 279 pounds. What did Donald play at? Like Donald might outweigh Stevenson.
Right.
It's wild. Even at the time, Stevenson was super, super, super light. But he's a guy who I think would not translate outside of his era. Just because the paradigm at offensive line has just changed so much, where like everybody is 330 pounds and you're going up against guys who are like 280, 290 pounds. He was an incredible player, but I think he played. I don't think he could have, if he'd come into the league 10 years later, I don't think he would have had the same career and the same impact.
How do you compare, if you would at all, Joe Green and Ndamukong Suh?
Well, Ndamukong Suh's dirtier and meaner. Well, I don't know about meaner.
Yeah,
but he was right. I mean, it's literally mean Joe Green. But like, when I say mean, I mean,
yeah,
I feel like more like vicious, right? Yeah. Um, I don't know. Joe Green also was very much kind of a product of his era. He was arguably the premier run stuffing defensive tackle, and he played in basically the only time in history where running was actually more efficient than passing. And that because of that confluence, he was arguably the most valuable player in football. If you put him in today's NFL, he would still be a star, but he just wouldn't be as impactful.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like Ndamukong Suh had more of a pass rush repertoire, which I don't think would have been as useful back in the 70s, but probably served him in better stead today.
If I had to, if we had to do an all-time team like again, I would probably. I think the two players I'd say they're fine with me in any era would be Ed Reed and Troy Polamalu. I can't, I mean, I just look at those guys and I think about them playing back then in any era. I think Mel Blount too is like, even though they made a rule they made a rule because of him, and he was still good after the rule. But Mel Blount being as big as he was playing corner. And I'd kind of like to see Mel Blount today against some of these water bug guys and see how that would have fared, like a today's equivalent. And I would have sided with Blount probably.
I'd add Aaron Donald and Bob Lilly to guys who would have been great in any era.
Yeah.
Alan Page, I think, would have done great in the modern NFL because he was he was maybe the best pass rushing defensive tackle of all time, playing in an era where the pass just wasn't as valuable as the run. You put him in today's NFL, and he would have been an absolute menace. People remember Warren Sapp for good reason. Maybe overly fondly. I'm not sure he's necessarily better than like John Randall, but people remember Warren Sapp, and if you put Alan Page in that like Warren Sapp role on the 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he would have popped even more. And it's not a slight on Warren Sapp, who I think is a deserved Hall of Famer, but Page was just different. Guys who could play in any era. Deacon, I don't really have any question about. Deacon could have played whenever.
Yeah.
Aaron
John
Donald, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know enough about the intricacies of line play to know if, like technique and whatever. I don't really feel super qualified.
Sure.
Other than, I do think that the greats, and especially, like the greats who are getting by in large part based on athleticism and size, because the size paradigm has definitely changed at offensive line in a way that would really neutralize somebody like Stevenson. But like the super big, strong guys from any era would probably hold up pretty well.
I think Ozzie Newsome would be better in this era than he was in the last era, but not as good in an earlier era. Like he would have been more of a wide receiver in an earlier era, I think, because he wasn't that kind of a blocker. He couldn't really block. But what he could do in this modern era, I think that he would have been special in this era for sure. Like it's, so especially earlier in his career, not the end when they're just like, when Kozar's literally throwing little running back routes to him like all the time, and it's keeping a streak alive, and he's occasionally making a downfield play. But like the first 5 years of his career, it was up there with Kellen Winslow in terms of aerial skill, not as an all-around player.
One of my favorites who I'd love to see would be Trey Hendricks, the Mad Stork.
Oh, yeah.
Ted Hendricks.
Ted Hendricks,
yeah.
Yes.
The Mad Stork, because he's just so different. Like he's like
he was 217 pounds, wasn't he?
Right. I think bigger than that, but he was just so long and so lean, and he showed up to Raiders practice one time like riding a horse with like a traffic cone as like his lance, and he was just different. He was a weird dude, but he had like 20 blocked kicks in his career. And he was, like excelled on, like, who had him before the Raiders? Who they're
The
like,
Colts.
he's just the Colts. And they're like, we don't know what to do with him. He's not like, what is he? We don't know. And they let him go. And Al Davis was like, at the time, running like the Island of Misfit Toys. And he's like, I don't know what to do with him either, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And he was just so cool and interesting and weird. And I would love to see him play today. Just because I feel like any era is better for having Ted Hendricks in it, the Mad Stork. And his nickname game is elite. The Mad Stork is, for my money, the best football nickname of all time.
Yeah, it's a fun one. That is definitely a fun one. I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I was about to say, special teams. I would love to see Cordero Patterson play in any era except the era he played in.
Yeah.
Because, like, kickoffs have been a huge part of the NFL every single point in NFL history except for the decade of Cordero Patterson's career, when the NFL is just like, let's just get rid of kickoffs for a decade. And despite that, he still set a ton of career records in the league that's like most hostile to his skills that we've ever seen. You put Patterson in the 60s, you put Patterson in the 80s, you put Patterson today, and I think he's doing to kickoff returns what Jerry Rice did to like every receiving record. He's just putting it so far out of reach of everybody ever that like it's one of those things where like, oh yeah, he was the best of all time. Well, obviously except for Cordero Patterson, but other than that, he was, like he gets like that own asterisk on all of his stuff where people just say it's just not fair to compare it to Cordero Patterson. What's the non-Cordero Patterson division for kickoff returners?
Yeah, I'd kind of like to see if Jack Lambert could be a scrappy linebacker in today's era. I don't think, how would his size and athletic ability translate, like if it calibrated to what the current era was probably like? Would he be would he still be the type of player that he was? And then how is that like? But then I'd love to see like the steel curtain where you could sub like Ray Lewis in for Jack Lambert and have a Palomalu, Reed, Mel Blount, trio in terms of defensive backs, and maybe put Woodson back, Charles Woodson there too. He could play corner or safety, and just see how, like, just trying to build like an absolute
throw in Rod Woodson
defense.
Get all the Woodsons.
Get all the Woodsons. That's right. If you got Woodson on the name, well, Darren's not bad either. So that's true.
It's not bad either.
Yeah. So.
Bill George, the linebacker. Probably, I mean, for my money, maybe the best coverage linebacker of all time. You put him in the modern era and you run, like, you give him a creative defensive coordinator. You give him Bill George and, like, think about all the disguises he could run and all the different, like, schemes he could run. Bill George is playing in, compared to today, like, the schemes were much more simplistic and it's like the caveman era. And he still just popped and stood out. He was, like first team All-Pro in 7 straight years. He would be a lot of fun. I think there are a lot of defensive coordinators who would have loved to have gotten their hands on a guy like Bill George.
I think Marshawn Lynch was a 70s running back who played in the 2000s. I
don't know. He was pretty good. He fit the 2000s pretty well.
He fit it great, but I think he would be fun in the 70s. I think John Riggins in this era would be so much fun to watch. I think Riggins is a better running back than people realize. And
I would worry he'd ride the pine.
You'd be worried, right? I don't think he.
I think he was great too.
Yeah.
I don't know that like he would be what coaching staffs were looking for. I don't know that he would necessarily get the shots.
Yeah.
But I do agree that people kind of underrate John Riggins, and they think he was just like one good season and that was it.
Yeah, because even his Jets years, you see some of the plays that he made with the Jets, and you're like, okay, that guy was fascinating. But I mean, there's so many players that you look at and you go, what could have been? We talked about Burt Jones. I think Ricky Williams is still high on that list, though I'm happy for him that he found himself. But like, that, you know, I don't think people realize. I think people in the era realize how good Ricky Williams was, but even when you see him with the Ravens and see him playing football like as a contributor, that guy was so good at the game. He was so smart. He was such a well-rounded running back, and it just, it wasn't his. It wasn't the thing that he loved, and he didn't love it to the level, and to be at the level he was, and not really loving the game to the or being obsessed with the game was, it's just kind of telling how talented that guy was.
We've talked about how like everybody like grows up and like their formative era of football is like when they first start paying attention to football, and like that gets locked in as that's the golden era of football, and forevermore all of their aesthetic preferences are dictated by that. People grew up in the 70s, they're like, man, we got to return to this defense and running, when in reality it was unwatchable. Like that's why they did the Mel Blount rule, that's why they made all those rule changes, because they're like, we're never going to grow the sport if we keep playing like this forever. But it doesn't matter. That was your formative years. That's what you were into. And for me, like the golden era of the NFL was those like early 2000s with like Clinton Portis, Ricky Williams, LaDainian Tomlinson, Priest Holmes. And then you had tight ends. You had Tony Gonzalez, you had Antonio Gates, you had Shannon Sharp, that like running back tight end. There
Terrell
were a couple,
Davis, Curtis Martin.
Right.
Yeah.
There were a couple like top wide receivers, but they were kind of more the aberration. Like it was kind of like that intermediate passing, heavy running, and especially like the post realignment AFC West to me is like the platonic ideal of offensive football. Those Denver Broncos running like all the naked bootlegs with like the tight end with the receiver running the deep go, and you have that tight end running like the 15-yard in, and you've got like the running back leaking out of the backfield. And that to me is like the peak of play design. It's all been downhill from there. So yeah, but I loved that. It was such an incredible era. Even just outside of nostalgia, but just thinking about like how much talent there was at running back for like that half decade that just all lined up and all synced up. And you get guys like Deuce McAllister might have been the 8th or 9th best running back in the NFL. And like not a knock on Deuce McAllister.
No, you like, anybody, if you have never seen Deuce McAllister at his peak, you will be blown away at how good that dude is. I mean, big,
that was the guy who took Ricky Williams' job.
Yeah. Big, fast, can catch, he was a fucking monster when he was healthy.
Jamal Lewis ran for 2,000 yards and was probably the 10th best running back in the NFL.
Yeah, and he's like, it's like the most forgotten 2,000-yard season probably of all the ones on the list.
Because he's getting overshadowed by it was probably like the 2017 draft class was the best running back draft class of all time. But in terms of like stacking successful classes in a row and just creating this unbelievable surplus of talent, and it warped fantasy football for decades.
Yeah.
Whoa. Because people were like, well, obviously the key to winning is you just get 2 really good running backs.
Yeah.
Because, there's like 15 or 16 of them, and you get 2 of those 15 or 16 and you win because they score a zillion points. And it's like, well, normally there's not 16 running backs this good. Tiki Barber. Like I haven't even mentioned Tiki Barber. Corey Dillon. Curtis Martin was rushing for 1,800 yards at like 32 years old.
Yeah.
It was insane how stacked the running back. And there's always some question of like, were the running backs that good, or was it just that like in the era, the dominant offensive philosophy was workhorse running backs. And so as a result, you had like average backs who were getting a ton of carries and they looked better than they were. But no, the running backs were that good. Yeah. Like it was so deep with so many like quality difference makers.
Do you think they were that good? Do you think part of the reason they were that good is that they got enough touches to actually be good and actually, play games with the defense a bit, or to wear down a team and know what's coming and be able to play a little bit of that game within the game. Because I don't think they do that enough here. And that's why, like, when Rico Dowdle got a lot of touches, I think that you kind of get a little bit more of that game within the game, because you can't do that when you get 3 touches in the first quarter, a touch at the end of the second quarter, and there haven't been enough play types that you've run to get a read on what the linebackers or safeties are doing, or how the alignment is, and going, okay, I know they're aligned this way because that's what they did earlier in the game on this play that we ran 3 times and they stopped us. So now I know I'm gonna fix that, because like Ojomo, the defensive tackle for the Eagles against the Packers recently. Like, there's a guy on Instagram who was doing a good job breaking down plays, who's talking about how, look, he saw this play 2 or 3 other times where the alignment was as such, and he figured out it was inside zone, so it was in a pivotal play in the fourth quarter. They tried to run it again, and he called the play for the Eagles just before it happened, and they completely crashed that play and forced a fumble. And he's not getting rotated out on a regular basis as a running back. Running backs, when they get enough touches, they can see what's coming on the opposite end like that. And I don't think they get that chance. So I just wonder, if there's a factor with that, because I think those guys were great too. I do. But it's hard for me to believe that running backs are that much softer now that they can't get those touches. You know what I mean?
I think that running backs would look better if teams ran more in this era. Yeah. No doubt in my mind that it's like, I think that we would think that the wide receivers of the 70s were better if teams threw more, right? Part of the reason why guys like Harold Jackson don't get the love is because their team barely threw the ball, and people look back now at the stat page and 900 receiving yards. Who cares? Those were the 900 hardest receiving yards you're ever going to see. Harold Jackson was a superstar, right?
Alfred Jenkins would have been a pretty damn good wide receiver outside of, in this era, as a good example, or Wallace Francis for that matter.
Right. So I wouldn't argue that, like, Rico Dowdle probably we would have a higher opinion of him if his teams had run him more in the past, obviously. But at the same time, like, no, the early 2000s genuinely were different. So I just pulled up a list of running backs in 2004 sorted by fantasy points. I'm just going to run some names. Okay.
Oh, trust me.
Sean Alexander, Tiki Barber, LaDainian Tomlinson, Curtis Martin, Edgerrin James, Corey Dillon, Brian Westbrook, Clinton Portis, Priest Holmes, Warwick Dunn, Amon Green, Jerome Bettis, Thomas Jones, Deuce McAllister, Fred Taylor, Emmitt Smith was still kicking around, Jamal Lewis, Larry Johnson, Marshall Faulk was still kicking around, Steven Jackson was just getting started.
This was my second year writing about fantasy football. It was 2004.
Rudy Johnson, I haven't even messed. Rudy Johnson, Willis McGahee, Dominic Williams had the great 2 years to start his career before injuries.
We're 2 years away. We're a few years away from Ray Rice.
Sure. Yeah. Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman might be like the 20th best running back in the NFL in 2004. Michael Pittman was great.
Was Allstott still running at that time?
I don't know. He's up with the fullbacks.
Eddie George was still there. Eddie George
was still around.
Eddie George was still running.
Well, not well.
That's true. Yeah, because he had the toe injury. That's true.
Yeah. Eddie George continued to exist, I will say. But if we're talking fullbacks, Lorenzo Neal, Max Strong, it was just different. It was. I always say, like, the amount of talent in any given class is random. Some classes are better wide receiver classes. Some classes are better running back classes. There's a lot of fluctuation from year to year. And sometimes it's just, like a good quarterback class. 2004 was just a good quarterback class. 2017 was just a good running back class. Occasionally, since it's random, you're going to stack 2 or 3 good classes in a row. In very rare instances, you're going to stack like 8 loaded running back classes in a row, and you're going to wind up with a positional group like the early 2000s running backs, which warped perceptions about like what's normal in the NFL for everyone. Like, it broke my brain. I'm sure it broke your brain about like what should we reasonably expect from the running back position? Well, when half of the league is featuring guys who could plausibly be like second team all pros in a typical year, this is what you can expect. Charlie Garner. I forgot Charlie Garner.
God, yeah. Charlie Garner was so good. He was so much fun to watch. You know, I mean, because you got him, you've got Ricky, you've got Garner. Ronnie Brown was good for a while. Yeah, I mean,
Cadillac Williams.
Oh God, yeah. For that 1 year, you know.
Yeah, and then injuries. It's tale as old as time.
Cadillac Williams at Auburn was unbelievably good. Just so that guy could like, he could go untouched in like a clown car. He could be in the middle of a clown car and make his way out and not get touched. That was how elusive he was in tight space. He was great. But yeah, no, fantastic conversation for sure. You know, we could probably go on with that, but we'll find something else a little bit more intriguing, because I think this is more for us at this point than it is for our
we're playing the remember a guy.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah. We're getting there at this point, but we do appreciate you. Definitely check out Adam's stuff at Football Guys. You know, regressions, you know, Dynasty in Theory, his work on kickers, his work on betting, you know, all of that. And then you got stuff I do at Football Guys, rookie scouting portfolio, working on that. And there'll be a pre-sale for the 2026 edition, 21st year in publication. There'll be a pre-sale probably at the end of this month, early next month. I'll begin that pre-sale at a discount period. And we hope that you guys have, you know, a good weekend. Good luck to you in week 11. And Thanksgiving's around the corner. That should be fun. Take care.